Okay, it's still going, still trying it out. We're not live yet. There, we're live on Facebook. So there we go. Yeah, there it is showing that. All right, so nobody touch their face, nobody get out of line. We're just having fun with this. So yes, thank you for being part of this. We're actually going to be looking in Matthew chapter 21 today. And so if you want to look at that, we're going from verses 12 to 17. And so I don't know if you guys are looking at this on your phone or on a paper Bible, but in verse 13, there's going to be I got two little windows on my verse here on my phone. And those are actually referencing back to the Old Testament verses that I asked you guys to look up. And then in verse 17, I believe there's one more. And so what I want to do is I want to read the story, but when we get to those markings, those dots, so the first one, Isaiah 56:7, you're going to be, when Jesus says, my house will be called a house of prayer, I'm going to break and you're going to get to read that piece in. And then for when he says den of robbers, you can look at Jeremiah 7:11, and in whoever's doing that, and then Psalm 8:2 when it gets to the end there, if you can read that. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you a little bit of context of what Jesus is actually saying, because he's making references back to what people would have known, and he's making stronger statements than we would be able to read here regularly. And so it tells more of the story. And so I thought that would be a really neat way for us to look at this, and then we can talk a little bit more about that. So here we go, starting verse 12. So here's where Jesus has entered the temple. So when he came in on the triumphal entry, he came, he rode in through Jerusalem as a king, as the deliverer. And so a lot of people would have expected that Jesus would have gone to Pilate's residence, or the seat of government, but instead Jesus went to the temple because he was establishing where his kingdom was going to go. So when a king conquered a city, the city wasn't conquered until the palace, or where the government was conquered. And so Jesus is coming in as the conqueror, but he goes to the temple, and so he's expressing a new revolution, and it's not aimed at the Romans. It's a changing of the religious system, and it's establishing the new covenant. And so it says Jesus, he went to the temple, and he got off his donkey and went into the temple courts and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables and the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. It is written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer. So Isaiah 56.
These I will bring to my holy mountain and give them joy in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all of the nations.
And then he goes on to say, but you are making it a den of robbers. Who's got Jeremiah 7:11?
Has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers to you? But I have been watching, declares the Lord.
And the blind and the lame came to him at the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the teachers of the law saw the wonderful things he did, and the children shouting in the temple courts, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were indignant. Do you hear what these children are saying? They asked him. Yes, Jesus replied. Have you never read? From the lips of children and infants, you, Lord, have called forth your praise. Psalm 8:2. Turn your mic on, please.
Through the praise of children and infants, you have established a stronghold against your enemies, to silence the foe and the avenger.
And he left them and went out of the city to Bethany, where he spent the night. Okay, so story is pretty straightforward, where Jesus goes in and he goes into the temple and he starts to just clean house. And there's a few things, guys. Keegan, can you guys turn off your mic there for?
Yeah.
Just bouncing with the birds there. They're singing back to you. Yeah, so Jesus goes into the temple, and if we actually read and backed up one more verse in Isaiah 56 and did 6 and 7, it's really interesting what Jesus is actually referencing in that passage, because that whole passage talks about those who are outside of the nation of Israel coming to be followers of God. And it says, Alyssa, are you looking at it now? 56. Can you read 56:6?
Yeah.
As well?
And foreigners will bind themselves to the Lord, to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, and to be his servants, all who keep the Sabbath without desecrating it, and who hold fast to my covenant. These I will bring to my holy mountain and give them joy in my house of prayer.
Thank you. And so what Jesus has done here is he's made a reference back because of the location where this buying and selling was taking place. So there were a few things that were going on here that we just need to be aware of. When people went to the Passover sacrifice, they were required to bring sacrifice whenever they made, like, they were traveling from all over the known world at that time back to Jerusalem. It was a pilgrimage, but one of the things that they needed to participate in was offering a personal sacrifice at the temple, because that was the center of the religious world for Jews at that time, and the temple was the only place that you could properly offer sacrifice. And so it was very important for them to do that. And so based on the whole idea of supply and demand and controlling the market and that kind of stuff, and making sure of the purity of the sacrifices would have been used as well. You weren't allowed to bring your own animals into sacrifice. So you had to buy them from the temple storehouse. Now, the other thing is you couldn't use regular currency. You had to use the temple money. And so you had to bring the money in, and then they would exchange it for fair value, which was thought to be a pretty good markup on it, so that the money that they were giving wasn't worth the same amount as the Jewish or the temple currency. And then they were free to buy at kind of, again, Disneyland style prices the animal that they were going to sacrifice. And so a lot of times for the poor and the marginalized, it became a very onerous task to be able to afford to do a sacrifice. And on top of that, this was taking place in what was called the court of the Gentiles. Now, the way the temple had been designed, there were a few different rooms, and depending on how pure you were considered in the Jewish faith, the closer you could get to the Holy of Holies. And so the outer court, for those who wanted to go and worship God, was the court of the Gentiles. And so, what they're doing here is they're actually set up commerce and business. And I don't know if any of you have ever been overseas into a marketplace area, or a shopping mall on Boxing Day, or a shopping mall when social distancing ends. Like, just watch how that goes. But think about trying to worship God in any kind of meaningful way in that kind of atmosphere. And so it was really done in kind of an elitist discrimination type motivation. And so when Jesus quotes back to this chapter, he calls it the house of prayer. And anybody who was knowledgeable in the ancient Jewish scriptures, the law and the prophets, would have caught that reference, would have known where it was from, and would have known what he was talking about. And so it was like shots fired, where he was like, this is my house. He's established himself as the authority in this house. I have brought in the new religion, and I am the rightful heir of this house. I am the ruler of the temple, and my kingdom. And he goes, and you guys are defiling it. And so, this is the revolutionary act. This is what turns the crowd, starts to turn the crowd in a greater way against him, because it is so personal. And so, then you go on to the next part of that verse, and you are making it a den of robbers. And so, Jeremiah chapter 7, it's talking about how, the prophet is prophesying against the people of Israel who have tainted the worship of God. And so he's contrasting, not only are you preventing those who want to come, you are actually have polluted everything about this. And so, this happens, and then the blind and the lame come to him, and Jesus shows the power of his kingdom. He actually makes a statement here towards the what his kingdom was going to be all about, and that is about restoring, because the blind and the lame come to him in the temple and they are healed. And so they're no longer physically defiled, and they can come into the temple, and they're now restored by Jesus. And so then, of course, the chief priests and the teachers of the law saw the wonderful things he did, and they hear the children shouting. And, in our society, children are cute, children are valued. And children are like, if you do something and disrespect kids in our society, it's considered to be bad, because it is bad. But in ancient society, children were considered to be property. Kids were, like heir, like you wanted an heir, but there was no value in the opinions of kids. And so, it was almost disgraceful for a teacher to have the kids be cheering for him. It was kind of like they were like, Jesus, they were almost accusing him of being, like a children's entertainer, or like a kids pastor in a church. Like, you're not a real pastor, you're not a real teacher, you just do kids stuff. Now, I'm talking about the kids pastor facetiously, because as a youth pastor, when I was working with young people, I'd always have well-meaning people come up to me and go, when are you going to be a real pastor? And the idea that you're not a real pastor when you're working with teens. And it's like, okay, yeah, no, that's fine. But they were actually accusing him of this, and they're like, Jesus, the kids can be fooled by your little tricks, but the adults aren't respecting you, the teachers aren't respecting you, you are not worthy of respect. And so, Jesus answers them, haven't you read from the lips of the children and infants that the Lord, that you, Lord, have called forth to praise? And I love that in chapter 8, verse 2 of the Psalms, that it says, like, the kids will cry out, or you use the kids to cry out to silence your enemies and foes. Like, Jesus drops that in there, and it's like he called them out, and he said, by acting the way that you are acting, you have become my enemies and foes. You are against my kingdom. You are against the people finding freedom and everything that we have for them. And so, this is the story of him cleaning out the temple. It wasn't just that he was angry and decided to flip over some tables. He was making a statement and drawing a line in the sand and saying, either you are for me in my kingdom, or you will oppose me. And you had to make a choice at that point. And he really, he used the Old Testament scriptures as a way to further bring that out. And so, it's just such a unique piece of this story. But, as you see the tone of the Holy Week change, it's after this story that, the leaders are definitely wanting to get rid of Jesus, and they're wanting to reject him. But you see the people start to turn, because sometimes Jesus says hard things, and they're not stuff that we like. And so, for us, the difficulty is we always need to go back and try and hear Jesus and hear what he is teaching to us, not through our own pride and not through our own just straight up understanding, but to learn from him and grow in him each and every day, because that's the only way that we will accept what he has for us and accept his teachings for our lives, and make the changes that we need to make. Otherwise, we're in danger of repeating the mistakes that are recorded here in Matthew 21. And so those are my thoughts for you on this today. So any questions around this? Anything that you guys want clarification on? Feel free to interact with that. Or anything you want to add. You want me to take it off Facebook Live? All right, we're going to stop the live stream now. So if you want to ask questions, you can. We can go. I got one question. Can we see if anybody is actually watching this on Facebook? Yeah, I had a couple people actually comment that they were watching it, and so there's a couple comments on it, so that's cool. I'll have to look at the stats otherwise. And it says 8 people are watching. So hello to you people out there watching at home. Any questions from anybody out there? Going once, going twice?
Did you have any like questions for us? Like any points that you wanted to get our opinions on specifically?
Not specifically. I just kind of wanted to throw this out there. I didn't have a kind of a Bible study plan. It was more of just a reading out and adding in the Old Testament scriptures into this, and just to see if there's any reflection. So it's a more open-ended type question.